My family sat around the dining table and asked me to forgive my younger brother for what he had done. I told them I'd think about it, smiled once, and spent the next 12 months quietly removing every financial foundation I had ever built underneath their lives. The site inspection in Calgary finished on a Thursday. The structural assessments came back clean across the board. Concrete cores, foundation shear walls, everything. My project manager sent the final sign-off by noon and told me to enjoy the extra days. I booked a WestJet flight back to Vancouver for 4 p.m. I didn't text my fiancée. We'd been together for 4 years and I still liked the idea of surprising her. That particular habit felt, in retrospect, like the most expensive one I ever had. I stopped at the Save-On-Foods near our building and picked up a bottle of the Niagara Riesling she liked, and a box of the chocolate things she kept in the back of the pantry, and pretended she didn't care about. She always ate the whole box. I always bought more. Our condo was on the 14th floor in Mount Pleasant. We'd bought it together 2 years earlier, mostly my down payment, because I'd been saving since my mid-20s and her freelance client base was still finding its footing, but I never counted that. She was my partner. What was mine was ours. That was what I believed. I unlocked the door quietly. The living room was dark. Music was coming from the bedroom. The kind she put on when she was unwinding. I set the wine and the chocolates on the kitchen counter and started walking down the hall. I heard 2 voices laughing. I recognized one of them immediately. It was my brother. I stood at the end of the hallway and let my brain cycle through every innocent explanation it could manufacture. I came up with several. I believed none of them. I opened the door. I won't describe what I saw in detail. You already understand what I walked into. What I remember most clearly are the small things. The half-eaten bowl of chips on my nightstand, her earrings. The gold ones I'd tracked down at an estate jeweler on Granville Street for her birthday. Sitting on top of the engineering manual I'd left on the dresser, and his jacket draped over my reading chair like he owned the room. My fiancée went white. My brother scrambled backward, pulling the sheets up, his mouth opening and closing, without producing a coherent syllable. Neither of them said anything that qualified as a real sentence for the first 30 seconds. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I looked at them the way I look at a structural diagram, when I've just identified the flaw that was there the entire time. Then I went to the closet and started packing. She followed me. She said my name over and over. She said it wasn't what it looked like, and then, almost immediately, admitted that it was. My brother appeared in the doorway and said my name twice without managing anything after it. I packed with precision: passport, birth certificate, my SIM card, laptop, external hard drive, charger, 3 days of clothes, the first things my hands found, toiletry bag, the small things that belong only to you, the things no shared life can absorb. She grabbed my arm at the door. I removed her hand carefully, the way you remove something that has stuck to something else. Without anger, just deliberately. "Where are you going?" she said. I didn't answer. I checked into a Delta hotel near the waterfront. I sat on the edge of the bed in the gray room and looked at the curtains. My phone vibrated steadily on the nightstand. Her name, then my brother's, cycling back and forth like a distress signal. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the collapse I'd expected. What I felt was something colder and quieter. The specific clarity that arrives when a thing you've been avoiding understanding finally becomes undeniable. Like a load calculation finally making sense. Like seeing exactly where the weight was going all along. At midnight, I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. I titled it Exit Architecture. I listed every professional contact I had personally introduced to my brother. Over the past 6 years. Every developer, every project director, every commercial real estate connection who had taken his calls, because my name was attached. I listed every client my fiancée had landed through me. University friends who'd started companies, colleagues I'd quietly nudged in her direction, the marketing director at my own firm I'd personally recommended her to. I listed every financial tie I had to my parents, the cosign on their home equity line against the lake property outside Kamloops, the guarantor agreements on both their vehicle leases, the annual country club membership I had been running through my corporate expense account for 2.5 years, without anyone ever asking how it was being paid for. I looked at that spreadsheet until 3 a.m. Then I saved it, closed the laptop, and went to sleep. My mother called at 8:15 the next morning. She didn't ask how I was. She told me my brother had called them in tears, and that he was a complete wreck. She used the word mistake 6 times in the first 4 minutes. She talked about family and forgiveness, and how these things happen between people and how what mattered was that we come through it together. She cried softly. The kind of crying that is meant to be heard. I said I hear you at appropriate intervals. I let her talk for 11 minutes. At the end, she asked if I'd come for Sunday dinner. I'll think about it, I said. I did not think about it once. My sister texted an hour later. She's 3 years older than me, and she has always been different. Genuinely kind, not performatively so. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask me to be understanding. She just wanted to know if I was okay and if I needed anything. I told her I was safe and needed space. Then I asked her, very directly, if she'd be willing to keep me informed about what was happening at home. She said yes, without hesitating. I called my firm's regional director that afternoon and told him I needed a transfer. I mentioned that the Toronto office had been on my mind for some time, which was mostly true. He moved things. The transfer was confirmed inside a week. I found a condo in Toronto's Junction neighborhood, 11th floor, exposed concrete, large windows facing west, more expensive than the Vancouver place. But I was no longer splitting anything with anyone. And I was no longer quietly absorbing a country club membership, 2 vehicle lease guarantees, and a co-signed home equity line that funded my parents' kitchen renovation and a 10-day trip to Portugal. I bought all new furniture. Minimal. Nothing that held any texture from the life I'd left. I found a gym 6 blocks from the building. A coffee shop that opened at 5:30 a.m. A running route along the Humber River that I traced until I knew every bend by memory. I didn't post anything online. I didn't update any accounts. I simply ceased to exist in the version of my life that they knew. My sister's first update came 6 weeks after I left. A photo, sent without commentary, the whole family at my parents' dining table, my brother's arm draped comfortably around my fiancé's shoulders, my mother and father smiling at them with a warmth I hadn't seen directed me in years. My sister's message said only, they announced they're officially together. Everyone seemed relieved. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to tell you. I looked at the photo for a long time. My fiancée was wearing the topaz necklace I'd bought her. The one I'd spent 3 months tracking down because she'd mentioned once, casually, that she liked the stone. I zoomed in on it. Then I put the phone down and opened the laptop. My brother's commercial real estate career had been built almost entirely on introductions I'd made for him. 3 years ago, when his track record was thin, and his resume was thinner, I'd called the development director at one of the largest firms in Western Canada and told him my brother was someone worth knowing. I'd vouched for him at an industry gala. I'd put my professional credibility behind someone who hadn't yet earned the rooms he was entering. I called the development director that evening. We talked for 20 minutes about a project my Toronto office was beginning. At the end of the call I mentioned in the most neutral tone I could manage that I was no longer in a position to personally endorse introductions involving my brother. No drama, no explanation, just information. He understood immediately. People who operate at that level always do. My fiancé's 3 anchor clients had all come through me. The largest was a tech company in Gastown run by my university roommate, who had hired her specifically because I'd asked him to. I called him. I told him I'd recently connected with a senior UX designer who'd just relocated to Vancouver from Montreal, with a remarkable portfolio, in exactly the kind of brand work his company was moving toward. Would he be open to an introduction? He said absolutely. I made the introduction, the talent did the rest. 6 weeks later my sister told me my fiancée had lost her biggest retainer. She'd been crying at dinner, money was tightening. I put another cell in red. The lake property came next. My parents had drawn down a home equity line against it to fund their renovation and the Portugal trip. The credit had been approved largely on the strength of my income, which I'd provided as a co-borrower. I worked with my lawyer in Toronto to begin the formal withdrawal process. The bank was required to give 90 days notice, during which my parents would need to refinance independently or repay the outstanding balance. The vehicle leases were more straightforward. Both had been guaranteed by me, because my father's credit score had suffered significantly after a failed private investment venture 3 years prior. The renewals were coming due. I contacted dealerships and formally removed myself from both guarantor agreements. The dealerships would need to assess my parents' eligibility on their own history. I already knew what that assessment would find. The country club was simplest of all. I stopped authorizing the annual fee through my corporate account. I had used the club for legitimate client meetings a handful of times a year, which had made the arrangement technically defensible, but the membership had always been for my mother's benefit. Her social standing, her community of people who lunched on weekdays and discussed renovation projects. She had never once asked who was covering it. The bill had simply, as far as she knew, taken care of itself. My sister's updates arrived with quiet regularity. Your brother lost 2 major listings he was counting on. He seems unwell. Mum got a letter about overdue fees at the club. She was mortified. Dad had an argument on the phone with the dealership. I heard it from the other room. The bank contacted them about the line of credit. They're meeting with a financial advisor. I read each one. I responded warmly, asking about her husband, steering the conversation back toward her life, and away from the rest of it. She was not my instrument. She was just an honest person in an impossible position, who had decided that honesty was the only way she could live with herself. About 10 months after I left Vancouver, my mother called again. The tone was entirely different from that first morning call. She wasn't performing, she sounded simply exhausted. Like a person who has been holding a specific posture for too long and can no longer maintain it. She said they were planning a dinner. And that they hoped I'd come. She said my name softly. Like she was checking whether it still worked. Then my brother got on the phone. He used my childhood nickname. His voice was frayed at the edges. He said he was sorry. He said he'd felt terrible every day for almost a year. He asked for 1 hour, just 1 hour, face to face. And I could hear in his voice something I recognized. The sound of someone who has just realized that the floor is not where they assumed it was. I told them I'd come the last Saturday of the month. I booked a direct flight to Kelowna on points. Checked into a hotel in the city center, slept 9 hours. In the morning I ran, showered, and dressed carefully. Dark chinos, a charcoal shirt, a watch that Ingrid had helped me choose at a shop in Yorkville. Nothing excessive. Just quietly, unmistakably composed. I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly the time I'd said I'd arrive. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked smaller. Her hair had gone further gray. And her smile was the kind held up from underneath by anxiety. She moved toward me. I let her hug me with my arms at my sides. When she pulled back, the smile had faltered. The table was set with the good dishes. Roast chicken, roasted vegetables, rolls from the bakery she'd been going to for 20 years. My mother had cooked every meal she knew I'd loved as a child. The intent was so transparent it almost produced something in me. Not quite pity, but its outline. My father stood and extended his hand. I shook it firmly, the way I shake hands with people I'm meeting for the first time in a professional context. My brother and my former fiancée sat together on one side of the table. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. She kept her eyes on her water glass. The topaz necklace was gone. My sister sat near the kitchen doorway with her husband. She caught my eye and gave me a small, careful nod. We ate. The conversation around me was performatively ordinary, which was worse than silence would have been. My father made a comment about the Canucks. My mother asked about Toronto. My brother attempted a joke that landed on the table like something dropped from a considerable height. After about 20 minutes, my father set down his fork. I think it's time we had a real conversation, he said, with the authority of a man who believes he is still running the room. We're family. We get through things together. That's what families do. I put my glass down slowly. My mother's eyes were already filling. We know how much pain you've been carrying, sweetheart, but your brother suffered enormously with the guilt. What happened wasn't malicious. People are human. What matters now is how we... I'd like to say something, I said. The table went quiet. I looked at my brother. Do you remember the capstone referrals? The Morrison Group introduction in 2021? He blinked. Yeah. I called their development director personally and told him you were the most reliable person I knew in the industry. That single call is what got you in the door. Before that you were cold calling and getting nowhere. I kept my voice level. The Elwood Partnership, the North Shore Development contacts. Every significant piece of business you closed. In the past 4 years, came through someone I introduced you to. Or someone who's trusted you because I told them they should. He opened his mouth. I'm not finished. He closed it. I turned to my former fiancé. Brightside Media. Your largest retainer for 2 years. I texted my university roommate and told him you were exceptional before he'd seen your portfolio. He hired you on my word. I paused. Holloway Communication. Peak Brand Studio. The same story each time. Every anchor client your business had was in my contacts list before it was in yours. She put her hand over her mouth. I looked at my parents. The Lake property. The home equity line. Approved in part because I co-signed it. I've been in the process of withdrawing my name from that agreement for several months. The 90-day notice period ends next week. My mother made a soft sound. The SUVs in the driveway. My name was on both lease guarantees. I had myself removed at renewal. The dealership will already have told you how the independent application went. My father's jaw tightened visibly. The country club. I have been covering the annual membership through my corporate expense account since you joined. I stopped authorizing that payment in February. No one spoke. You brought me here because you want things to return to normal. I said. But, the normal you want to return to was something I was quietly building and maintaining the entire time. None of you ever asked whose name was on the agreements. You never asked how the membership was being paid, or who was making calls on your behalf, or what it cost me to keep all of it standing. You assumed it would simply continue, regardless of what you did. My brother pushed back his chair and stood up. You can't do this. Those deals were my entire livelihood. I borrowed against them. Read the agreements, I said. Everything I did was legal. I withdrew referrals I was never obligated to make. I declined to continue relationships that were always voluntary. We're your family. My father's voice rose. You have a moral obligation. I built this family a very comfortable life, I said, and my voice went quiet in a way that filled the room more than any raised voice could. For years. Without announcement, without expectation, without keeping score. And the one time I needed someone to stand in my corner, every single one of you chose the easier option. So now you have exactly what you asked for. You asked me to remove myself from the situation. I did. You're only now learning what that actually costs. My former fiancée was crying. My brother was gripping the back of his chair with both hands. My mother had her face buried in her palms. I stood up, folded my napkin and placed it on the table. My sister watched me from across the room. She didn't look betrayed. She looked like someone who had understood something difficult and was finally allowing herself to acknowledge it. I walked to the hallway. Alec. My brother's voice cracked on the single syllable. The way old wood cracks under load it was never designed to carry. I didn't turn around. Take care of yourselves, I said. I meant it in the most literal and impersonal sense possible. I walked to the rental car, started the engine, and drove toward the highway. In the rearview mirror, the kitchen light burned in the window of the house, and silhouettes moved urgently behind the curtains. 2 months later, my sister called and told me my brother's business had filed for creditor protection. He'd taken on debt to fund expansion based on deals that never closed. Deals that had been contingent on a professional network that had quietly relocated itself. My former fiancée had lost her remaining clients and taken a full-time salaried position at a print shop. The lake property had been listed. My parents were moving to a smaller place closer to the city. She told me all of this without editorializing. That's how she is. At the end of the call, she mentioned that she and her husband had been thinking about Toronto. My guest room, I said, is yours whenever you want it. A month after that, I received a 3-page email from my former fiancée. She described how my brother had changed once the money ran out. How the relationship had collapsed under financial pressure. How she had understood too late that what she'd believed was love had actually been the comfort of proximity to someone stable. And that the stable person had always been me, not him. She asked if we could talk. I read the entire email over my morning coffee. Then I forwarded it to my brother's email address, with no subject line and no message attached. I blocked them both the same afternoon. My sister texted 2 days later to say they'd had a serious falling out. The engagement was off. 6 months ago, I was promoted to Regional Director of Infrastructure for the Eastern Division. The announcement was made at a full staff meeting. My manager said generous things. People shook my hand. I went back to my office and kept working. Because there was a great deal of it to do. And the work had always been something I was genuinely good at. Ingrid and I have been together for 8 months now. She's a family law attorney who has strong opinions about good coffee and spends her weekends hiking trails in the Greenbelt with a focused commitment she applies to everything. She has no interest in being impressed by my title or my apartment or any of the external markers of the life I've built, which is precisely why I find her worth keeping. We cook together on Thursday evenings. We talk about our work without ego. We disagree productively about things that matter. Last weekend we sat on the balcony as the city darkened around us. And she asked, out of nowhere, whether I ever regretted how things had ended with my family. I thought about it honestly. I regret building so much for people who saw it as permanent sceneries, I said. I don't regret leaving. The moment I stopped holding everything up, I found out what could actually stand on its own. She was quiet for a moment. And what could? I looked at the lights spreading across the city below us. The familiar skyline I'd made my own over the past year. The view that belonged to no one's memory but mine. Just me, I said, as it turns out, just me. She didn't say anything. She reached over and took my hand, and we sat there until the sky finished going dark. The foundations I'm standing on now, I laid myself. Nobody's name is on them but mine. And for the first time in longer than I can accurately remember, that is exactly enough.